In the Pipelines tab, we can find information related to the different data flows we've organised within our tenant. Just like in the Listeners and Data Syncs tabs, the first thing we see is the time range filter, allowing us to choose the time period we're interested in. The information shown here includes how much data, how many events per second are entering through the listeners in the last 12 hours, and compares it to the previous 12-hour period. It also shows how many events are exiting through the data syncs in the last 12 hours, compared to the previous 12-hour range, and the volume of data entering through the listeners. In this case, the chart shows both incoming and outgoing events, but we can also view incoming and outgoing bytes. As you can see, each has its own graph. We have the same card and table view as the other Onum components. The only difference is that in the case of pipelines, when we use the table view, we see checkboxes that let us select multiple elements at once and perform operations such as publishing them, meaning we can deploy a series of pipelines we've defined so they begin ingesting and transforming data, or even delete them if we no longer need them or if they're safe to remove. If they're currently running, we can stop them all at once. Maybe we tested within 5 or 6 data sources or types, confirmed they work, found the necessary transformations, and now want them stopped until production. We can stop them simultaneously here. In this case, they are grouped by status, not by type. In Onum, pipelines can be in one of 3 statuses. First is the draft state, which means it is still a draft. These are pipelines that haven't yet been published or run. This is typical when you're starting to work with a new data source or category. These pipelines may be incomplete. Maybe they don't yet have a data sync, for example, but they're continuously saved. Stopped pipelines are those that have already been published and run at some point, but are currently not processing data. Keep in mind the labels defined in these pipelines are still active and receiving input. Lastly, running pipelines are actively reading from their labels, applying transformations and sending data to their defined destinations. In this case, we see a percentage, which shows how much of the incoming data is being successfully sent to a destination. For example, in this pipeline, 80.97% of the data coming through listeners is being sent somewhere. That means we're reducing or saving 19% of the data. This percentage is calculated based on the incoming bytes. Finally, just so you're aware, Onum pipelines support versioning. So there's always a draft version that captures ongoing edits for the next pipeline version. But we also store information on previously published versions. For example, if something stops working properly, you can roll back to a previous working version. Another useful feature is that you can add annotations to each version, which helps track what changes were made in each one. In that way, you can identify which version you'd want to recover at any point in time. Finally, we have the ability to debug the pipeline, which lets you capture a portion of events. This can only be done if all destinations are fully configured. Once active, we can inspect events flowing through the pipeline and see what outputs are being generated. Here we can see the incoming data, and for each event passing through actions, we see its input and output. For example, here we see what enters an action, in this case a parser, and what comes out. You can see all the fields that have been generated. There's also an error output message with issues, such as a missing delimiter in a parser. All actions have at least one input and 2 outputs, the default output and the error output. Some actions like conditionals have an output for each condition defined, plus a default and error output. Labels and listeners only have one output because their input is outside of the pipeline, while data syncs only have one input and no output, since the data leaves the Onum ecosystem. For instance, this tool is very useful to check why, say, nothing is arriving at the message builder. Why might that happen? Maybe everything is going to the default output, which isn't connected to anything. This debugging capability helps us verify whether the pipeline is working as we expect.